Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. Kind of recording this last minute because I completely forgot that there was a episode airing on Sunday, so that kind of screwed me up a little bit. I completely forgot. I reminded, nevertheless, it's not important. So anyway, this week's episode, interesting case. We have this dude named Gabriel who ends up having his head cut off along with a chicken's. I was like, okay, what's the point of that? I was like, I didn't get what that was all about. Because it's interesting because it's all started with a missing chicken that led to a murder case, interestingly enough. And it turns out that basically it's all about kind of making the killing look more occultish. Which is interesting because apparently that's what Gabriel specialized in, which in retrospect now I'm like, well, no, because Gabriel, no, I was about to say, is that complete and utter BS? It's like, no, it was, because the dude, that was like, all right, the dude that like stole a skull like 2 years ago, or whatever. It's kind of actually sad because it's like, oh, I was getting bullied at school, and I thought people thought like, hey, if I like told people I'm practicing this and I got this skull and everything, then people will leave me alone. But sadly, he still kept getting bullied, and he also got arrested for stealing the skull and everything. I'm like, oh man, that super sucks. That's sad. It's just like a small part of the story, but it's kind of like, oh man, that's sad and sucks. Obviously, Sherlock has had many experience with the occult type of things, and usually it's like, oh, it's just kind of like a bait and switch type of situation of like making you look over here while like the real murder is over here, because the cops will be investigating, like thinking this is something occultish, when in actuality it's just a cover up for what the actual murder was about. Technically, it ended up, well, not technically, outright ended up being the case, which is fascinating. Because it's this crazy story that constantly evolves, because it's like at first it's like they get a bottle through their window, telling them to talk to Father Vega. Father Vega points them towards this rum company in Guatemala called Champerico Rum. And basically, they don't follow labor laws. It's just kind of, they don't treat their workers right, essentially, in Guatemala. And obviously, they're a big business. Well, they're a small business, but at the same time, a big business. Because there's also a woman, Valentina, who was connected to this whole situation. She's kind of one of the people kind of was fighting against this, like how Champerico would operate, because basically they have like a armed military force of sorts, kind of like handling stuff for them, but they'd be like, oh, no, they're not connected to us. So then the whole thing of like, oh, Valentina disappeared. It was also interesting too what the lady from the was it Federation of Labor, her perspective, because like you have Belle being like, well, why would someone from our country want to help another country? Like, it wouldn't benefit them. I mean, isn't that a situation like people from different countries coming here and taking our jobs? She's like, oh, yes, it's kind of an old mindset, because her mindset was, and it was a very interesting thing. I wonder, is that like how people typically really think? And I thought it was kind of an interesting perspective of like, we help those other countries because by helping them increase their wages and stuff like that, we make it so that the companies don't want to go to these other countries because it'd be easy to get cheaper labor. So if they have to kind of pay people good wages there, they're like, okay, we'll just stay in America and keep a lot of jobs American, which is like, huh. I mean, I have no say in that situation. It's just like hearing that perspective is kind of interesting. I was like, huh, like I said, that's why I'm kind of wondering, is that like a real life thing that's kind of been like said and done? And just kind of like, at the same time, it's like, we're helping out people. For her, it says like, why would we want to, like, reason why we're doing this is because it's a kind of a win-win situation. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. But nevertheless, I'm not trying to get all political or anything here. Just like, I just thought like hearing that was kind of interesting to me. But it turns out Valentina didn't get done in by Champerico. It turns out that she's actually still alive. She just took her trip here to the States because she was pregnant as a way to disappear. And it's like, oh, they knew that Valentina was here. They just didn't do anything because it's like, oh, you made yourself disappear, so now we don't have to make you disappear. So then it goes, okay, so she still believes Champerico is behind it, because it turns out that a lot of their military forces are here working as security guards. So it's like, that shows a parallel line of like, oh yeah, like they have some angle in this themselves. But Joan, as well as Gabriel, had previously told her like, yeah, but because of the pictures, they can make the lie that like, oh, we didn't know about that. So, but then in the long run, it turns out the one behind all of this is a councilman we met in this episode, and he was done in by a bald spot, which is very interesting. Because the first time they met, he was wearing a toupee, and later on, Sherlock saw him without it. And I was like, okay, he's the one that killed Gabriel. Because he's also the one that fed them the occult story anyway. That's why I was kind of like, was that BS? It's like, no, because of the story about the dude who got locked up for, like, stealing the skulls. Like, okay, so that wasn't 100% BS. So Gabriel did help. He was an expert in the occult and stuff like that. But it just helped benefit him to set the crime scene up to be the way it is, because it's going to get you looking one way when you should be looking the other way. But also, it fit with the profile, the story he was telling of like, oh yeah, Gabriel was into the, like, studying the occult. He was an expert in it and whatnot. It turns out he has like dealings with Champerico, and so he was actually caught in one of the pictures. So because that was the thing, Joan was like, okay, there's nothing in these pictures, and it turns out that was the case. So but it wasn't, obviously that's all very circumstantial, I'm sure, but it's like what really sets it off is like, oh, it was enough to get them a warrant to get his blood, because the chicken whose head he cut off, it fought back and got his blood underneath its talons. So they had to compare the blood, and it's like, boom, boom, you're taken care of. So that was kind of interesting. It is kind of still interesting, though, too, that the company wasn't really dealt with, because they weren't like the main bad guys in this. It's just the councilman was the one behind this. But I'm curious to see whether that ever circles back around. Probably not. It's just kind of like, here's this evil corporation that exists in this world, and just kind of like, it's there. It's so interesting, too, because I wasn't expecting it to be like $1 billion company, but I guess it makes sense. Just because it's like, oh, yeah, because it's a family-owned thing. I don't think like, in my mind, I'm thinking family-owned. It's like, well, just because it's family-owned doesn't mean it's small business. Like, it's small business, but in a big scale, it's not like a large conglomerate like many other, like, businesses in its case. So that was kind of an interesting aspect, that whole case. But then on the flip side of things, what the other part of the story is that Sherlock and Joan are continuing their search for a replacement for Bell. And there's like a police detective that's coming down the stairs, and Sherlock comes in and is like, what the hell is up with that? And it's like, oh yeah. And he's leaving, and it's like, what's that all about? And it's like, oh, him and Joan got together, and then Sherlock's pissed about it because he's like, why did you do that? Like, we were supposed, like, he was one of the people we were looking out as a replacement for Belle. She's like, well, one thing led to another, and he's like, you should have just called me or something. She's like, I'm supposed to call you every time, like, I hook up with somebody or something, and he's like, well, call once every 2 or 3 years wouldn't be that bad. And it's just the fact is that it's like, I thought we had Romero. I thought she was going to be like our top person. It's like, well, yes, but then I wanted to talk to you, get your agreement before we take her to the captain. It's like, yeah, sure, fine. And he's like, good. Try not to sleep with her. I just love that little back and forth. It's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. That is kind of interesting. I mean, it's like, hey, Joan, do whatever she wants to do. It's just so interesting because I wasn't expecting her to do something like that. Because it doesn't seem like it'd be Joan, because it seems but I mean, it's like, hey, you get talking, meet the right person, one thing lead to another. It's like, no problem. It's just funny that Sherlock's kind of shaming her, because it's like, why did you do that? If you want it, like, now we got to remove him from the list because it might affect things. If he were chosen, it'd make things weird between us, because it's like, what if your potential future relationship or something could potentially impede our work, or it could complicate things later on when you actually meet someone. Like, there'd always be this weird awkwardness between you two, and like I said, interfere with the work. So I just thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. Obviously, didn't go into that extreme detail, but obviously you can kind of surmise that's what Sherlock's basically alluding to. But then, like, Sherlock's getting all excited. He's like, I got a new detective. He's like, for you to check out. It's like, you're looking to replace Belle? It's like, because he's just so excited about it. Like, oh, yeah, check, she's great. She's fantastic. She's great. You should have a meeting with her. And he's like, yeah, you can cut the BS. I know this isn't about, like, oh, getting me a detective to replace Belle. It's like, no, you want someone that will work with you, someone who's willing to work with a civilian. He's like, well, yes, that's kind of part of the reason. But then you get him in. The fact is, she's got a good record. She wants to come here anyway, transfer here anyway. So it's like, it's a win-win. And it's like, yeah, but what about all the other cops here? And Sherlock's like, they're all great too. Obviously, like, with you at the lead, they all are stellar, like Belle. But then Gregson's like, they're all annoyed by you. And Sherlock's like, yes, they're all annoyed by me. It's like, right. Belle's the only one that's been able to tolerate you these past years. No one else would be willing to put up with you as long as he has. So Gregson meets with Romero, and she says all the right things, because for her, it's like, no, I know that they're civilians. At first, I was kind of like, well, they're civilians? Like, what? This has got to be some joke. But it's like, no, they actually do great work. And the fact of the matter is, I know they're only a part of the equation. And the fact of the matter is, they only come in when you tell them to get great. It's like, yo, she's not got anything twisted. It's like, yo, I was like, oh, this would be interesting. It's like, wow, it's so interesting. We're meeting the person ahead of time, like this far in advance. I'm like, is something going to happen later on to kind of undo this? I meant like later on in the season. Wasn't expecting it to be later on the episode. But then she admits that there's something she didn't tell Sherlock and Watson. But then it turns out like her previous CO is someone that Gregson knows. I think they were partners in the past, or they are really good buddies. And Moira, and he goes visit her, and turns out like what she told Gregson, Romero told Gregson, was like, basically her early days on the job, like her partner shot someone, thought there was a gun, planted the gun, she went along with it, she came clean a week later, but then the words got used creative, and even I was like, what the hell does that mean? Because even Gregson asked, like, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know what that means. Circle back, we find out. It's because it's the same term used to describe what Watson and Sherlock do. It's like, oh, we heard a sound, we broke in, or like, oh man, like they skate that line of legal, they cross that line. But it kind of gets results and stuff like that because they have like leeway. Like it's like, oh, the way we're able to kind of jump through the hoops that we kind of get to in some cases and stuff like that. That's for you. But we don't need one of our detectives doing that because, and then he's like, I know you did that on purpose. There's no way you didn't come across that when you were searching through her. Like you are smart enough to have come across all that stuff. And the reason why is because you know she's a kindred spirit. She let you slide on a lot of the stuff you do. But it's like that's why I put you and Bell together, because Bell is as by the books as anyone. He's always going to be like, make sure never to cross that line. And if you ever do it, he'd do whatever it takes to kind of like, you know, fill in those blanks to, you know, protect me, but also protect you guys from yourselves from crossing that line. So you have that buffer and that protection. So he's like, oh, he was a babysitter. It's like, yeah, but it started off that way, but then it grew into something great. You guys working together became a powerhouse team. And so for him, it's like you guys on your own, like he doesn't know how long this whole dynamic of theirs can last if it keeps like, you know, without Bell, you know, it's like, you know, lightning struck once. We'll have to wait and see. We're going to have to work hard to make sure it strikes twice. And you can tell Sherlock was kind of stricken by it, but I think at the same time he realized like he came to understand. It's like, I think in his haste to replace Bell, like thinking he's got, like a kindred. He didn't think about an avenue, an aspect like that. And I thought that was going to be an interesting perspective because you figured as much, because I already kind of had a feeling like Gregson was going to bring up something Sherlock hadn't thought about from a different perspective. And he did. And I thought that was such an interesting angle to come at it from. And so, but I think it made Sherlock realize, like on some levels, he even more so than like he recognizes Bell's skills and all that. But I think there's still a part of him that was kind of like, oh, I didn't recognize like the importance of what Bell does to like what we do, a part of our process, not only as a friend, but what he does for us professionally, even more so. Like I already put him at the like layer, like at the top because of his skills already, but I have to add another bump to that because it's like, because I don't think he really thought of that through. Maybe he did and he ignored it, but maybe it's just like, you know, subconsciously he didn't really come, whatever the case may be. I just thought that was so fascinating. So, but for him, he's like, obviously him and Gregson are probably going to be working a lot closer to figure this out. They're not really telling Marcus what they're really up to. But he's like, oh, I saw you talking to Gregson. Are you okay? He's like, oh, let's go to this place. He's like, I'd rather, what was it? Eat a like dead pig or something to eat what Marcus was suggesting. And he apparently has all those pigs that he was using for the thing earlier. He was talking to that detective about, but nevertheless, so. But he's kind of like, you know, he's like, I'm going to miss you, is what Sherlock says. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. But then Bell's like, you know, hey, he's like, I know you're kind of looking at the clock, but the fact of the matter is we still got time. It's like, dude, it's like, it hits you even more because it's like, yeah, at some point he's going to be leaving. That is crazy to think about. And it's heartbreaking because it's like they've been such a well-oiled machine for so long. It's going to be weird seeing someone else kind of filling in that role, you know? So I thought that was kind of fascinating. Just that little avenue and just kind of the back and forth between them. It's like, I thought that was so neat. It just makes that more and more real with each episode that's passing. So I just thought that was kind of a nice touch to the episode. So Do note, if you don't know ahead of time, that there is a episode tonight. I am saying that not only because this is going up today, but also because I'm recording this today because I completely forgot there was an episode last night. Let that slip my mind. But nevertheless, I'm very interested to see what goes down in today's episode, which is fair to say. I'm wondering why they decided to do that. Have you ever done that in the past before? I don't remember. Either way, it's not important. So do know that if you don't know that there is an episode tonight, at least from what I looked up, not unless they change things last minute. But yeah, to the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.